In the endless dust of the Wild West, a single decision could change everything. The sun was sinking behind the hills when he saw Hersmel, fragile and barely breathing. Blood stained her torn dress, and her dark eyes held both fear and hope. She was a stranger, yet something in her face made his heart tighten. He knew that stopping for her might mean trouble, but leaving her there could mean death. The wind whispered across the prairie like a warning, carrying the scent of an approaching storm. His hands trembled as he lifted her onto his horse, not knowing who she was or what danger followed. In that moment, kindness overpowered fear, and he rode toward his ranch, unaware that this choice would invite shadows from the horizon, shadows riding fast, armed, and ready to decide his fate before the next sunrise. The evening sky glowed in shades of red and gold as the rancher guided his horse along the quiet riverbank, his mind on nothing but the ride home. Then, his eyes caught a fragile figure lying, half hidden in the tall grass. It was a young native girl, her dress torn, her ankle twisted, and a streak of dried blood on her cheek. Her breath came in quick, shallow bursts, and her eyes wide with fear searched his face as if pleading for safety. For a moment, he hesitated, knowing the West was no place for blind trust. But something inside him pushed away the doubt. He climbed down, lifted her gently into his arms, and placed her on his horse. The girl clung to the saddle, silent but trembling. With each step toward his ranch, he felt the air grow heavier, unaware that this single act of kindness had already set dangerous wheels in motion. Inside the dimly lit ranch, the air was thick with the scent of oil from the burning lantern. The rancher guided the girl to a small wooden chair near the fire, his boots creaking on the floorboards. She sat quietly, her posture tense, her eyes darting to the windows as if expecting someone to burst through at any moment. He knelt beside her, carefully rolling up the torn fabric around her ankle. The wound was raw, swollen, and streaked with dirt. He fetched a basin of warm water and began cleaning it with slow, steady hands, his mind racing with questions he dared not ask. She flinched at the touch but did not pull away. When he tried speaking, she gave no answer, only soft, trembling words in her native tongues, sounds heavy with meaning he could not understand. Yet through her eyes, he read gratitude mixed with something darker, something that felt like warning. After wrapping her ankle with clean cloth, he offered her bread and water. She accepted with both hands, her fingers shaking, eating in silence except for the faint crackle of the fire. He noticed how she would pause mid-bite, tilting her head toward the distant hills, as if listening for something only she could hear. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the faint howl of a coyote across the prairie. But it was not the animal that made her stiffen, it was something else. The rancher felt it too, an unspoken tension creeping through the walls like cold air. That night, he left the lantern burning, its light casting long, uneasy shadows across the room. He sat by the window with his rifle leaning against the wall, watching the darkness beyond the fence. The girl lay on the cot in the corner, her eyes open even as she pretended to rest. Every now and then, she would glance at him, as if checking whether he was still there, as if his presence was her only shield. Hours passed in slow silence, the ticking of the clock almost deafening. Somewhere in the distance, the faint rhythm of hooves echoed too far to be a threat, yet close enough to keep him from closing his eyes. He told himself it was nothing, just a lone rider passing through, but deep down, he knew better. The girl's breathing grew shallow, her gaze fixed on the door, as though she feared it would open without warning. The rancher felt a strange pull, a sense of responsibility for this stranger who had stumbled into his life. He didn't know who she was, where she came from, or why danger seemed to follow her like a shadow. But one thing was certain. By morning, the West would bring him answers. And some answers, he feared, could change a man's life forever.
The first light of dawn crept through the dusty windows, painting the wooden floor with pale gold. The rancher had barely slept, his eyes burning from a night of watching shadows move outside. He stepped onto the porch, the cold morning air biting against his skin. That's when he saw them fresh horse tracks, cutting deep into the soil. Circling the edge of his land, the prints were sharp, the kind made by heavy, fast-moving horses, and there were too many to count. He knelt to touch. The ground, the earth was still warm. Whoever they were, they had been here recently, maybe just hours ago. His jaw tightened as he scanned the horizon, but all he saw was a thin mist rising from the valley. Then, a sound carried through the morning stillness, low, steady drumbeats. So faint they almost blended with the wind. They came in slow rhythms. At first, then faster, each thud echoing across the wide, empty land like a distant heartbeat. The rancher froze, the hair on the back of his neck standing on end. Inside, the girl stirred. When he walked in, she was sitting up, her dark eyes wide and fixed on him as if she already knew what he had heard. Her hands trembled as she spoke rapidly in her native tongue, her voice urgent and sharp. He tried to calm her, telling her she was safe here, but she shook her head violently. She pointed toward the valley, then to the tracks outside, her breaths, quick and uneven. He didn't understand every word, but the fear in her voice was clear. Someone was coming, and they were not coming in peace. The rancher's grip tightened around his rifle. He paced to the window, scanning the open plains, his mind running through possibilities. Were these riders from her tribe? Or were they enemies chasing her for a reason she hadn't told him? The girl's eyes followed him, her small frame trembling as though every second was dragging them closer to something inevitable. He told her to eat something, to regain her strength, but she barely touched the bread. Her gaze kept darting to the door, as if expecting it to burst open at any moment. Outside, the drumbeats grew louder, no longer hidden by the wind. The sound was joined by another faint metallic clatter, like the shifting of weapons. The rancher's stomach knotted. He knew enough about the West to understand that when drums and steel came together, trouble was never far behind. The girl whispered something again, softer this time, almost like a plea. Though he couldn't understand her words, the look in her eyes told him enough. Whatever was coming, it would not stop until it reached them. And as the sun climbed higher, the land around the ranch seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the storm to break. By midday, the stillness of the plains was shattered. The faint drum beats that had haunted the morning gave way to a sound far heavier, the deep, thunderous rhythm of hooves striking the earth. The rancher stepped onto the porch, his rifle in hand, the sun glaring off the barrel. A low haze of dust rolled across the horizon like a storm cloud, growing thicker with every passing second. Then they emerged, first a single shadow, then another, until the open land seemed to spill riders from every direction. Dozens, then hundreds, their silhouettes sharp against the blazing sky. Horses snorted and stamped, their flanks glistening with sweat. The men atop them sat tall and silent, their faces carved in stone, their eyes locked on the ranch with a focus that made the air feel heavier. Each one carried a weapon, rifles slung over shoulders, pistols at their belts, spears gleaming in the sun. They didn't rush forward. They spread out, circling the property like a tightening noose. The girl stood behind him, her small hands clutching his arm so tightly he could feel the tremor in her grip. Her breath came fast, but she didn't speak. She didn't need to. Whatever this was, she had expected it. He could hear the snorts of the horses, the creak of leather saddles, the faint jingle of spurs, all blending into a low, menacing chorus. The rancher's heart pounded, but he kept his stance firm, his eyes scanning for a leader among the riders. Then one man stepped forward, his horse jet black and restless beneath him. He wore a long coat that swayed with the wind, and across his chest hung a bandolier of bullets. His face was unreadable, his gaze sharp enough to cut through silence. For a long moment, no one spoke. The world seemed to hold still. The only sound, the steady thud of the black horse's hooves as it came closer. The girl's grip tightened. He felt her nails through his sleeve. The leader stopped a few yards from the porch, his voice low yet carrying across the space. "You have something that belongs to us," he said, his words deliberate, almost calm. The rancher didn't answer. His eyes flicked to the girl, then back to the man, searching for any sign of truth in that claim. The riders shifted in their saddles, hands brushing against weapons, the air humming with tension. The rancher knew one wrong move could turn the quiet standoff into bloodshed. He took a slow breath, steadying his voice, but inside, his mind raced. He didn't know their full story, but he knew one thing: if he gave her up without understanding why they wanted her, he'd never forgive himself. And as the leader's hand inched toward his holster, the rancher realized the decision he made next would decide whether the sun set on peace or fire. The leader's eyes locked on the rancher, his voice deep and cold as steel. "Hand her over, and you walk away alive." The words hung heavy in the dry air, but the rancher didn't flinch. He glanced at the girl, her face pale, her eyes wide with a silent plea, and something inside him shifted. This was no longer about chance or kindness. This was about standing against the storm, no matter the cost. Slowly, he stepped forward, placing himself between her and the riders, his rifle steady in his grip. "She stays," he said, his voice firm, unshaken. A tense silence followed, broken only by the restless snort of the black horse. Then, like The snap of a rope, hands went to weapons. The rancher's heart pounded, but his stance didn't break. In that breathless moment before chaos, he knew if the West was going to take him, it would take him standing,